Hello and welcome to Cafetography.co.uk. Today we're taking a look at one of the camera lenses most sought after by many professional photographers, the nicely made and highly expensive Canon 24-70mm f2.8 to USM. This is the long-awaited update to one of the most popular and revered professional lenses ever produced, the original 24-70mm f2.8 USM L. The older lens was iconic and sold extremely well, especially to wedding photographers, paparazzi, and press and portrait photographers. But its relatively large size and weight, and its not entirely perfect picture quality, meant that an update was always going to be welcome. And so, here we are. The new lens is designed for use on Canon's expensive full-frame cameras, where 24mm makes a very wide angle, and zooming in to 70mm gives us short telephoto. 24-70mm is not an especially wide focal range, but it's perfectly good for general photography, being plenty wide enough to catch the bigger picture, but also zoomed in enough for portrait photography. This is a particularly good zoom range for wedding photography. If you're using the lens on one of Canon's less expensive APS-C cameras, then you'll find that 24mm isn't really the widest angle you could hope for. However, the lens's zoom range will still just about be useful for general photography. But this lens really was born to be on a full-frame camera. The maximum aperture of f2.8 lets in a good amount of light, which enables you to use faster shutter speeds for low light or sports photography. f2.8 can also give you a nicely out-of-focus background, which is helpful for getting pictures with more depth and separation between subject and background. The lens itself is built very nicely. Even though it's made with quite a lot of plastic, it's very sturdy and tough. It's a sizable and heavy piece of equipment with a large 82mm filter thread. The zoom ring on our copy of the lens was a little stiff, but it's likely that they loosen up over time. The focus ring on this lens is extremely smooth and precise, and obviously the lens has full-time manual focusing. Its USM autofocus motor is extremely fast, but it makes a quiet rumbling noise. The focus accuracy of our lens was very high. As you can see, the only switch on this lens is for auto or manual focus. This lens does not have image stabilization, which was a surprise for many when it came out, especially as the lens is so expensive. It was a risky decision for Canon to make, but many in Canon's target market of professional photographers won't be too bothered by this. They'll often be using fast shutter speeds to capture people in action, and so image stabilization is not always necessary for them. Let's look at the lens's image quality. We'll start by looking at how it performs on one of Canon's expensive full-frame cameras, a 20-megapixel Canon 6D. We are testing this lens with peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction turned on. With the lens zoomed out to 24mm and the aperture wide open at f2.8, the image quality is extremely sharp in the middle of the image, with very impressive levels of colour and contrast. The edges of the image are also very sharp indeed. Stopping down to f4 and then f5.6 yield even better picture quality. Clearly, this lens is extremely sharp at 24mm. If we zoom in to 35mm with the aperture wide open at f2.8, once again, the image is astonishingly sharp and punchy in the middle of the frame. The corners of the image look slightly softer. Stopping down to f4 and then f5.6 brings a nice improvement, so it's good to see that the 35mm focal length continues to look strong. Finally, zoom all the way into 70mm to see yet more incredible sharpness in the centre of the image at f2.8. The corners of the image also look pretty good, and stopping down to f4 and finally f5.6 again offers a very nice improvement. Overall, the image quality of this lens is very impressive indeed. The sheer constant sharpness and contrast in the middle of the frame will blow you away. The corners aren't always perfect, but they always respond well to stopping down. Apart from the slight hiccup at 35mm, I can't seriously imagine anyone being unhappy with the image quality this lens offers on a full-frame camera. Well, let's look at the image quality on one of Canon's less expensive APS-C cameras, in this case, a 20 megapixel Canon 70D. Once again, we've turned on peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction. At 24mm and with the aperture wide open at f2.8, we see an extremely sharp image in the middle of the frame, right through into the corners. Stopping down to f5.6 brings about a tiny improvement, but the picture quality here is basically extremely impressive. Let's zoom in to 35mm. With the aperture at f2.8, just like on a full frame camera, we have extreme sharpness in the middle of the image, but the corners are slightly soft. Even when the lens is topped down to f5.6, we don't see particularly good corners at 35mm. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 70mm. At f2.8, the lens is fairly sharp in the middle of the images, although not quite as good as at wider angles. The corners of the images are good enough, and on stopping down to f5.6, the corners improve just a little bit. The middle of the image looks fantastic again. So we can say that on an APS-C camera the lens gives another excellent performance, although it doesn't shine quite as much at 70mm as it does on a full frame camera. Let's look at distortion and vignetting levels. On an APS-C camera they're not really much of an issue, so let's see how the lens performs on full frame. At 24mm some barrel distortion is noticeable, but it's not too bad. The corners are certainly looking quite dark. You can brighten things up by using peripheral illumination on your camera, or by stopping the lens down to f4. At f5.6, any vignetting has finally departed. At 35mm, the distortion has almost straightened out, and when we zoom in to 70mm, we see moderate pincushion distortion. Vignetting at f2.8 is rather strong once again, but it largely goes away once you stop down to f4. All in all, it's a rather average performance for a fast standard zoom lens. The lens is able to focus down to about 38cm, so while it's not designed for macro work, it's getting close enough for shots of flowers and other small subjects. The good news is that the lens is fairly sharp at close focus distances, although a bit of chromatic aberration is apparent. Stop the lens down to f4 for even more sharpness. A lot of zoom lenses struggle in this regard, so it's actually a very nice performance. The lens works reasonably well against bright lights, maintaining good levels of contrast. However, some flaring is easily revealed when the sun is directly in your frame. One more nice feature of the lens is that it has 9 aperture blades. That means that, if you stop the lens down a little, then you can get some very bright 18-point sun stars from bright lights, which are quite attractive and rather prominent. The quality of this lens's bokeh is very nice for a zoom lens. If we look at the outer focus areas in this picture, they're looking very nice and smooth. This is essential for any fast lens, as you'll be looking for gentle backgrounds which don't distract you from your subject. Overall, the Canon 24-70mm f2.8 USM L Mark II may not be a completely perfect lens, but it undoubtedly offers the best image quality available in a fast standard zoom lens. It's astonishingly sharp, with wonderful levels of contrast. The fast and accurate autofocus system means that you'll be getting sharp, punchy looking pictures that would put a smile on the face of any seasoned professional photographer, and the build quality of the lens is beyond reproach. The sheer price of this lens means it's for professionals only, but this would certainly be an excellent lens to rent for a special occasion. If you can afford it, then it comes very highly recommended indeed.